Here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun, and I say,
it'll automatically start.
It's alright.
Yep. And then you can film. And then when you're done,
It's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling.
Good morning, gang. It's Friday morning. Friday morning? Yeah. And we are meeting. We are at, where are we at? We are at Cottonwood Falls. That's alright, I'll survive. Well, shit, you were over there. Shit. Hold on.
Hey, Michael, you got a copy?
We're gonna try this again. We are in the town of Cottonwood Falls. We camped out at this lake last night. I don't even know what that lake was called.
Michael.
Either way, it was by a lake, and you can't really beat the spot where it was at because it was free and it was by a lake, and they had firewood that they provided, and there would be no room to complain about that because it was amazing. I think some folks are airing down today. I am not, because that's just how I roll. Park over here by this RV dump. Hopefully it doesn't smell. Anyways, so we're on to our second day for the Flint Hills Adventure Trail. It's been a beautiful trip so far. If you guys are not aware, Kansas is an absolutely gorgeous state, especially when you get out here. If he comes up here to talk to me, what? What, you want your quarters back? No. I hate him so much. Okay, anyways, we're gonna get on the road here in a minute. Everybody's trying to get together. We're at this park meeting everybody, and we're gonna get lined up and ready to go. towns, Westmoreland. We went through Wanego, which is apparently the home of Oz. We passed the Wizard of Oz Museum. And now we're on this dusty road. I'm actually pretty excited because I've got the other camera up and going and I can see what it's doing. It's down there on my fender. I don't know if you can see it or not. But it's down there on my fender, and so I'm just trying to record some of this other stuff and see kind of how this all works out. There's some old, mudhole, some old homesteads and stuff like that back out in here. There's some of these old trailers. So we're in a pretty rural area now. There's a lot of soybean out here. It's been really pretty though. This has been a great trip. I would love to bring all you girls back out here and do it over about a 3-day period. We've had to kind of bypass a lot of it due to time constraints and things like that. We couldn't do the water crossings yesterday because it was raining yesterday. So we have had to bypass that. But yeah, this is definitely something that I would like to look into a little deeper for all you guys to maybe come and do with us one time. It's a beautiful trip. So we are kind of headed towards camp. I can't see them. We're getting ready to head towards camp-ish, sort of, kind of. I think we're going to the Nebraska line today and then kind of backtracking to camp, I think is the plan at this point. So anyways, that's what we're doing, and we're just on some gravel right now, just getting dusted. So we'll talk to you guys in a little bit. Deuces. creepy. We're out here in the middle of nowhere. And there's this really cool stone building coming up. So I can't wait to get a picture of that. Stuff like being influencer these days? You gotta have like 2 cameras.
If you don't have an SD card, you just walk around with
You got one of these bougie cameras for like everything. We go to the cloud, man. Screw the SD cards. I don't even have to. How are you recording?
You need to delete that.
Nope. good this time. Was sitting at a stoplight in this little town called Marysville, and my traction control and ABS light came on. Wasn't that worried about it. It's happened before, especially like if I'm getting pulled one way or the other from the wind and it's like a sensor or whatever. And we stopped at a stoplight.
I think this is the park we're going to.
And
we'll go up your parking lot and kind of wait and see.
anyhow, we went a couple miles and turned on this road, and I started seeing like some smoke and smelling gear oil, so I stopped, and it looks like I have blown an axle seal on my rear, which we just had redone in May, right before Adventure Her. So it really sucks. We're like 10 miles from the Nebraska line. So it looks like I'm catching a one-way ride back to Oklahoma via trailer tomorrow. Poor Lance is gonna have to come get me. Poor Lance. So we're headed to this park in the city. The city of Marysville apparently has a park with RV sites and all that jazz. So that's where
this is where he was talking.
So that's where we're headed for the night. We're gonna invade this poor little city park. But anywho.
Oh, nobody need to watch that little white car. He's acting like a damn fool running through here.
That's what we're doing. We're gonna go to the Maysville City RV Park. It says something about tents, and then we're gonna go from there. Deuces. Okay, so I thought I'd show you guys my lovely axle seal blue. This thing stinks. It smells kind of like sulfur. It's all over my bumper. It's all over my rear tire. It's terrible. Bad news. Bad news bears. I didn't make the state park with everybody else, so I'm camping at this town called Blue Rapids tonight. I'm at some sort of state park. They've got like a rodeo going on. I know you can't see over that, but anyway, oh yeah, you can see all the cars through there. Maybe not. This thing doesn't zoom in. Anyways, there's a rodeo going on. They're having like some big citywide summer festival, so that's where I'm at. Gonna be tonight. I hear pigs screaming, like screaming pigs. I don't know if you've ever heard a pig scream, but it's freaking terrifying. Anyways, so there's like this little park down through here, porta potty, and that's where I'll be. My buddy Steven's gonna come back and hang out with me. I think the girls that are with me are gonna stay at the state park because I've asked them to, because they're going to be way more comfortable at the state park than they would be here. And that's what I got. I'm waiting on Lance. He'll come pick me up tomorrow. We'll trailer her back home. Good times. Good times. I didn't make it to Nebraska though. That was a goal. We were like 10 miles short, so I guess that means I'll just have to go back to Nebraska at some point. Anyway, that's what I tell you in. Appreciate it. Have a great day. Bye.